Last time we talked about when introversion becomes avoidance. This is the other side, when sensitivity becomes a story people tell about themselves that stops them from asking where the sensitivity actually came from. In 1997, Elaine Aron at Stony Brook published the first systematic study of what she called sensory processing sensitivity. 1,200 adults. Validated questionnaires. Brain imaging followed years later. She found that roughly 15 to 20% of the population processes sensory and emotional stimuli more deeply than the rest, slower to habituate, more reactive to subtlety, more overwhelmed by volume. The science was solid. The framework was useful. She identified something real. And then the internet did what the internet does with real things, simplified it, branded it, and sold it back as an identity. HSP became a community. The community became a content category. The content category became a moral identity. The empath, the person who feels too much, whose sensitivity is simultaneously a gift, a burden, and somehow a personality type with its own merchandise. The speed of that transformation would be impressive if it weren't costing people years of genuine self-understanding. Because here's what Aron's model never claimed, and what the internet deliberately skips. There is a distinction between sensitivity as temperament and sensitivity as adaptation. One is born, the other is built. And the mechanism that builds it has a specific name and a specific address in neuroscience. Nancy Eisenberg at Arizona State spent decades studying how empathic response develops in children. Her work reshapes this conversation entirely. Empathic accuracy, the ability to read emotional states in other people, arrives through two completely different developmental pathways. Pathway 1, innate sensitivity. A child with high sensory processing sensitivity who naturally picks up more emotional data from the environment. This is Aron's territory, and it's real. Pathway 2, threat-driven learning. A child in an unpredictable household who learns to read the room because safety depends on it. A parent's mood shifts, and the child needs to detect that shift 3 seconds before it becomes dangerous. The motivation isn't depth of feeling, it's survival. The behavioral output of both pathways is nearly identical. Both produce adults who walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional temperature. Both produce people who absorb other people's moods like a sponge absorbs water. Both produce exhaustion after social interaction. Same external signature, different engine underneath. One runs on awareness, the other runs on a threat detection system that never learned to stand down. Brain imaging tells the rest of the story. A 2014 fMRI study compared brain activation in high-sensitivity adults and found something Aron's original work hadn't captured. In subjects with stable childhoods, the neural response to emotional stimuli was strong but organized. The brain activated more intensely and then regulated efficiently. In subjects with adverse childhood experiences, the activation was strong and chaotic. The brain lit up and then struggled to turn off. Same sensitivity label, same questionnaire score, different architecture underneath. The first brain is listening. The second brain is watching. There was a guy, late 20s, articulate, likable, who introduced himself at social gatherings as an empath. Wore it like credentials. I feel everything. People respected it. He respected it. The identity felt earned and true. What nobody mentioned, including him, was that feeling everything started at age 9 in a household where a parent's bad day could turn into anyone's bad night. The reading the room skill was real and impressive. The origin wasn't a gift. It was a security system doing its job long after the original threat had moved out. That system kept someone alive when it mattered. That's not nothing. But calling a security system a superpower is like calling insomnia a night shift. It describes the behavior while completely missing the cause. The neuroscience term is neuroception, the nervous system's below-conscious scanning for threat in social environments. In a safe environment, neuroception runs quietly in the background like a smoke detector that rarely activates. In an unsafe childhood environment, it gets turned to maximum sensitivity and stays there. The child becomes an adult who walks into every room already scanning, who takes on emotional weight that isn't theirs, who feels responsible for the mood of every person in a 20-foot radius. The internet calls that depth. The research calls it chronic hypervigilance with an empathic overlay. But here's where the frame shifts. This is not about dismissing sensitivity. Real, innate, Aron-style high sensitivity exists. It's measurable, and it doesn't need defending. The problem is that an entire generation adopted the label without asking one question: when did this start? If the answer is always, as far back as I can remember, in every setting equally, that might be temperament. If the answer involves a specific house, specific people, and a specific age, when the world first felt unsafe, that's not temperament. That's training. And the difference matters because temperament is something to work with, while training is something that can be retrained. Eisenberg's research points to a clean distinction. Empathic accuracy that produces distress is not the same as empathic accuracy that produces understanding. The first is surveillance. The second is connection. People stuck in the first pattern aren't feeling too much. They're scanning too fast, and they've been doing it for so long that the scanning feels like identity. The intervention isn't learning to feel less. It's learning to distinguish between reading someone's emotion because the room is interesting and reading it because the room might be dangerous. One question separates the two. When a person walks into a room and immediately senses the mood, is the first impulse curiosity or caution? What's happening here? Versus, am I safe here? The answer doesn't change the sensitivity. It changes the story about where it came from. And that story determines whether a person spends the next decade celebrating the pattern or examining it. Think about that for a second. There's a pattern in how these things connect. Avoidance, overfeeling, and one more thing that holds the structure together. That's Tuesday.